I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov on using a vessel before Tevila. When is it permissible? Now, great source is sponsoring a shir. Call heter 718-851-8651 and email ist@yeshivanet.com. Harav Smith.
A while ago we learned the sugya of muktzah, and we said, which is a mishnah, that you're allowed to use a hammer to crack a nut. Someone asked me an innocent question. Okay, so there's no problem with muktzah. The Maisa, no one toivels their hammer. How is it mutter to use a hammer to prepare the food? Now this is really part of a different share, but the poskim all agree a nutcracker is chayiv in Tevila. Even though it doesn't touch the nut, but touches the shell, which is part of the food. And according to some poskim, you make a bracha when you toivel a nutcracker. But all agree a nutcracker is chayiv in Tevila. So now the question is, since the hammer is functioning as a temporary nutcracker, why doesn't it need tefillah? I thought it was a good joke, and I started to look into it. But before long, we had a full share, and I'll tell you a few more of the shaylos that are negeya. Someone that just bought a glass turntable for his microwave. So they make either plastic or glass, but it's the plate that you put in the center and it spins around. And typically we don't toivel it because you don't put food directly onto the tray. But this person puts on raw potatoes, other foods, and he wants to know, does he have to toivel it? So you notice the common denominator here. Usually it's not chayiv in tefillah. But this case, a potato is touching the turntable. Another question, which is, someone just asked me, Grada, he always makes baked potatoes in the oven. Sometimes he puts challah to defrost in the oven, onto the actual oven tray racks, which is metal. You have to toivel that? Doesn't sound right, but then again, he's using it as a kli oichel. Then I saw in Raphael's Sefer, he said a Bachram asked him, probably on one of these dreaded road trips, when everything happens, the kids, they had nothing to eat, and they wanted to buy eggs, that you don't need a hechshen eggs, and cook the eggs in their metal negelwasser cup, a metal cup. So they have a fire, and they cooked it in a metal cup. So now using a cup that wasn't for food, that wasn't toiveled. So I said this once, so I said, that's nothing. He said he heard a real shayla. Someone wanted to warm up his pizza, but he didn't have he didn't have a toaster oven, so he used the iron, that you iron shirts. Someone else, really a chachma, they mixed up their drink with a screwdriver. Do you have to toilet? I was wondering, why can't you use a spoon? But probably in today's drinks, 44-ounce big gulp, that the spoon doesn't fit to the bottom. So anyhow, we have an agenda, 20 more shaylos, and they're all very much negeya. So the emphasis is that we can't take this lightly, because besides the fact that the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, it's a mitzvah deraisa to toivel a keili. So not toiveling when you have to is a bittul mitzvah. But besides that, there's an issur derabanan of using a keili shaloi tavel. So it's not just a simple shayla. So what I think it really boils down to is one simple question, chakir if you like to say it with that word. We know that the chiyuv tefillah is only for food items. What does that mean exactly? I can give you two choices, and they both sound reasonable. Does it mean it has to be a kli achila? For example, a knife, a plate, or is it a keili that's used in conjunction with food? The nafkamina is a iron is warming a pizza. That's true, but in no stretch of imagination is it a kli oichel. So is it a kli oichel or anything that's used together with food? So if you look at the Gemara, I think you get a nice guidance where to go. The Gemara learns that the chiyuv deraisa of tefillas keili is based on the pasuk by kli midyan. Besides kashering, they also had to toivel it. Frekti Yishalmi, if you kasher it, it's no longer treif. Why do you have to kasher? What are you doing with kasher? Why do you have to toivel it? What are you doing with toiveling more than kashering? So the Taz in the beginning of our Simon Kuf Chaf quotes to Yishalmi, K'dei sheyetzu mitumase shal akum L'kdushasei shel Yisrael. In other words, it's not a question of tarfus, because even a new keili needs tefillah. But a yid is not a guy. We don't eat, we don't fress, we eat. We have a mizbeach, shulchan mizbeach, and avodah achila. We have to get it ready for our achila. So now we understand, a regular hammer, even if you're a carpenter and use it all day, is not chayiv in tefillah. It's a goyish keili, but what Yishalmi explains, it's only because of tumas, akum, and kedushas Yisrael. Who told you? Maybe a carpenter is also kedushas Yisrael. So this is the Gemara's question. Frek the Gemara, since you tell me even a kosher keili, a new keili is chayiv in tefillah, so why don't you have to toivel a scissor? Who told you that it's totally an achila? And for the Gemara, look again. What's the story of Kli Midyan talking about? They took pots, pans. So the Gemara, Kli Suda Amurim B'Parsha. The only chi of tefillah is Kli Suda. That's why a hammer doesn't need tefillah. Now we would add, the real kedusha, we always need and everything. But the chiyuv is by food, not by other utensils. So now we understand, l'chayra, and it makes a lot of sense to say, that enachanami, if you cook you warm your pizza in the toaster oven, you have to toivel the rack at least. But you're using an iron, it's not a kli suda. But then again, if lemaisa you are preparing the food with that, and it's warming up the food, maybe that's enough. In other words, typically kli suda is what's chayiv. But if you tell me you're a cheverman and you mix your drink with a screwdriver, so you're using it for suda. So this is our shaila. Do we say it has to be a suda and for food, or once it's for food, it doesn't have to be a kli suda? So you look at Shulchan Aruch, you'll find an unbelievable parallel for our shaila. Let me ask you this shaila. Let's say I buy a steak knife. I'm just choosing that because that's a very clear kli suda. But I'm not using it for steak. I'm not. But let's say I sell leather. So the best knife to cut leather is a steak knife. So I buy a steak knife that was made for a steak knife to cut leather. Do I have to toivel this steak knife? L'chayr, it's a kli oichel, but it's not used for oichel. So this is a beferish mechaber in Siv Ches, that a kli klofim, which means it's used to cut leather, doesn't need tefillah. Even if you took a regular knife and made it a kli klofim, it is potter from tefillah. What's the svara? Very pashut. You're not using it for food. It's a kli suda. There it says you made it ois kli suda. Okay? So that's simple. Okay? In other words, even if it was a kli suda, you made it ois kli suda, no chiyat tefillah. Now please paskin the next shaila. It's saying me with my steak knife that's now become a kli klaf. I used it the whole winter. Erev Pesach, a few minutes before this man, I realized I have to slice the steak. We made a roast. I have no steak knife. Can I take this kli klafim, which is also a steak knife, and cut up my roast? What do you say to that? I'm using it only once. It's an official, full-fledged kli klaf. I'm using it once to cut up my roast. Mutter asa. So we don't have to go far. This is Ramah. On the mechaber that says that if you're making the kli klafim, you're potter from tefillah, Zok Ramah, if you want to use it even once, I feel derech haroi, to cut a roast, you have to toivel it. No question about it. No one argues. So this is music to our ears. This is what we're looking for. Here we have a situation. It's not a kli suda. I'm using it only once, and taka, it's chayev and tefillah. Now, let me add a little more geschmack. Let's say someone buys it off me and makes it into a kli suda. That's pashut, because now it's a kli suda. But this is remaining. This will remain a kli klafim. But if wants to use it, you're not allowed to without tefillah. What do we see from this Ramah that's klar v'titag? You don't look at the roiv tashmisha. This is a kli klafim. So roiv tashmisha is not chayiv. You want to use it once is chayiv and tefillah. Now, this is a beautiful lishitosai. Listen to this. There's a sugya of kashering, which is in Hilchas Pesach, and of course in Hilchas Yeridea. But in Tov Nun Aleph Sivav, the Mechaber says as follows. The general klal of kashering is the way it became treif, that's the way you have to kasher it. So if you use the fleishige pot to cook milk, you have to boil water. If you use it on the fire, you took a milchige fork and roasted a frank on the fire, you have to use fire to get out the blias. Dr. Mechaber, let's say you have a vessel that needs kashering, but you're not sure, you don't remember what you did. Did you use it on the fire, or boiling, or iroi? Dr. Mechaber, you go basa roiv tashmisha. Whatever you generally do, you more often cook than roast, so it's enough to boil the water. As I state in Mechaber. Dr. Ramah, nothing doing. You don't go basa roiv tashmisha. So what do you see? The Ramah in Tov Nun Aleph and Sivav and Orach Chaim holds no roiv tashmisha. And this is a beautiful shitasai in Kuf Chaf Siv Ches. You don't say, well, there's a kli klaf from your potter. You don't go basa roiv tashmisha. And indeed, you have to toivel the keili. Now the emes is, it's more than that. Because what's takab shat in the Mechaber that you're allowed to toivel it, you're allowed to kasher it, roiv tashmisha, maybe use it for fire. So the Rashbi explains, because since you waited after 24 hours, it's an eine ben yoimoi, so at most it's an issur rabbanan. So Chazal and matriach you to do the full-fledged kashering, it's enough with boiling water. But there, the Ramah Taka says, it doesn't make sense. Because maybe there's a blia fire there. How could you ignore that? But here, the Ramah is more pashit. Because if you're using this to eat with food with it, or prepare food, what's the heter? So this is klar l'chayra. The Ramah says you don't go basa roiv tashmishay, even once is chayiv and tefillah. I should mention it's a mitzvah lafarsim. People say it as if it came straight from Sinai. That if you have a keili, you didn't toivel it yet, you didn't get a chance to go to the mikveh, you're allowed to use it once without tefillah. There's no such thing. The Ramah said beferish, even a more chiddush situation, even a thing that's not a kli tefillah. Now, where did it come from? Probably because most poskim hold on disposable pan, you don't have to toivel it, you only use it once, so once, gzera shava. But Iba Yisei Makra, our Ramah, that is not true. Iba Yisei Masvara, why is once mutter? There's a chi of the rice to toivel a keili. Good. Now, so now we see l'chayra, and this is a little scary. According to the Ramah, you use something once, you have to toivel it. Does that lead us to the very difficult maskana that you have to toivel the screwdriver and the iron and the washing cup, the hammer? It's even though it's once, but the maisa, you know how to use it once. So it makes it a little more exciting. The Pri Chodosh, who wrote a whole pirush on Yeridea, in 4 places he disagrees with the Ramah, this Ramah, and he says the li nira das lina basa roiv tashmishay. You can't be chayiv one time. I mean, if you have a kli that's chayiv and tefillah, once enough. But if you take a kli that's potter and use it just once, it's not chayiv and tefillah. What's the Pri Chodesh's svara? I think it's pashut, because the kli suda amurim b'parashat Gemara says the chiyuv is kli suda. This is not a kli suda. This is an iron. This is to iron your shirt, not to make food. But what's interesting is that he says this again in 4 places, and he gives an interesting halacha l'maisa. In Siv Dalet of our Simon, the Mechaber contrasts two different shilas. Both of them are very negative to us. A tripodis, which is a tripod. It has three legs, and you put the pot on top of it, and the fire is on the bottom, and that's where you cook food. So the Mechaber says that this tripod is not chayiv in tefillah. You're cooking the food in this pot. So why is the tripod not chayiv in tefillah? It doesn't touch the food. You don't touch the pot. Masha'en Ketzak the Mechaber, a different type of keili, and I verified this is what we have today in a certain sense, a grill cover. You have a grill, you have a barbecue, so you have the coals on the bottom, you have a metal tray, and you put the food on top of the tray. So Zok the Mechaber, that's chayiv in tefillah. Why? Because the food is touching it. So the contrast is, if you have a tripod that at no time to touch the food, no chayiv tefillah. But a grill cover does need tefillah. Zok the Pichadash, let's say sometimes you use a tripod as is, you put a frankfurter on the tripod, so you don't have to toivel it. Because a tripod is not a chayiv in tefillah. And he said this in Sif Cotton Yud Beis, Sif Cotton Yud Tes, Sif Cotton Chav Beis, Sif Cotton Chav Gimel. So in 4 places he says, even if you're using it for food and it's touching, roiv tashmish. Now, how do you explain this? I think it's Masik Midrash. Because the Gemara says, what's chayiv in tefillah? Klei suda. A tripod is not a klei suda, period. An iron is not a klei suda, period. So there's no chiyuv. You're using it with food, but klei suda. And the Shev Yakov in a Tshuva Simon Lamed Aleph has a similar shaila about interesting that it cooks water for the heating system. Sometimes you take out water for tea. So the Shev Yakov, he lived on 80 years after the Pri Chodesh. But there's a Sefer Pri Chodesh who says, Roiv Tashmishay. However, there is one pella you have to deal with. When do we find you go bust a roiv? B'di'evet. Milk fell into meat. B'di'evet, roiv, shishim. But we never do something lechatchila relying on roiv. Frek the Or HaChaim HaKadosh in his Pirish, Pri Toya Kayidua, he wrote a whole sefer on the Pri Chodesh, which the Chidah says with the greatest haskama to the Pri Chodesh, that the Or HaChaim HaKadosh wrote a sefer, Pri Toya, and they're printed together in a sefer, Peiros Gedoisa. Taina to Pri Toya, how could the Pri Chodesh say such a thing? The Chatchila, you're taking a tripod, putting a piece of meat on it, cooking the meat, and what's your heter? Roiv. Roiv is not mat lechatchila. Roiv is a b'di'eved. And therefore, Zokti Pri Toya, it can't be. You can't use a keili that wasn't toiveling even once, even if it's not a kli suda, because you're using it for food. So what's the machlokes Pri Chodesh and Pri Toya? I think it's beautiful. The Pri Chodesh held it has to be a kli suda. So therefore you go b'as roiv. You have to identify the keili. The Pri Chodesh says kli suda is always a raya that it's oichel. But this is oichel. You're roasting a frank. What's your heter? Roiv? But you're roasting a frank. So the Pri Chodesh understood it's a din in suda, kli suda. Pri Toya understood if you're using it with food, even that's enough. But according to this, we're in big trouble. The hammer, the screwdriver, and the iron are need tefillah. But the good news is, if you learn a little further in the same shtickle, Pri Toya Sif Cotton Yud Aleph, he discusses what he discusses earlier, and that is a case of a misparayim, a scissors. Now it's hard to know the exact metzias, but Kenivas Yerek, that word we do know, it's a Gemara in Shabbos, Yom Kippur, like the halacha. It's either peeling or preparing vegetables. So again, I can't tell you the metzias, it was different metzias, but they had a certain type of scissor that was not a kli oichel. But occasionally use it to be kind of the irakos, to peel the irakos. So the HaChaim HaKadosh, you have to toivel it, because you're using it for food. He says no, because nobody uses this scissor for those irakos. You want to do it? You want to be different? Gesundheit, be different. Butler died the eitza kolada. Now what's he saying? Because you're peculiar, you don't make into kli suda. So we see that even the Archaim HaKadosh holds, if something is unusual, it's not a kli suda. A screwdriver is not a kli suda. There's no chiyuv tefillah. What? Tripod. We're going to get there soon. Good. Now, this is what the Archaim HaKadosh says. According to that, he says, if no one used a tripod for putting on food in it, taka enechanami, it would be takapata, like the Pichodesh. But before I tell you what the machloikis is, I want to give you another beautiful insight, halacha l'maisa. The Mechaz Yitzkin Chelik Test, Simon Pei Dalid, speaks about someone that wants to broil liver. The Baruch don't know what that means anymore, but you have to kash a liver. So, he did it in an interesting way. There's a fire burning, and he took a stoker. A stoker is the mechata, shem yechata, like a metal piece, and he put the liver on the stoker, held it over the fire, and it kashed the liver. Good idea. But he didn't toivel it. Zok the Minchas Yitzchak, you're using it for food. You're broiling meat. Boiled liver. Zok the Minchas Yitzchak, and it says in Egen Chiddush, since Lamaisa, it's not made to do that, then there's no chiyuv tefillah. Now it's interesting, this is mamash the pritoyas yisoid, that even if you don't go basaroiv, but it has to be normal. I don't know why it doesn't bring the pritoya, but we see this yisoid, something that is not done, doesn't become a kli oichel, period. So we have the pritoya's case of this scissor. Now we have the Minchas Yitzchak case of a stoker. So where do we go from here? How do we paskin? So first of all, there are paiskim, the Shev Yakov, as I mentioned, Pesachei Tshuva quotes it, other Chayim quote it, that go to Pichodesh. Pichodesh was the Pichodesh. But the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, does not hold like the Pichodesh. The Pichodesh argues in the Ramah. And the Gedolei Achronim, Shach and Taz, don't argue. So the Paiskim say, we have to accept the yisoid of the pritoya. That if you're using it for food, it needs tefillah. And the pritoya together. So Rabbi Yasha says this, Mechas Shloima and Chelik Beisim and Samach Vov, the Sefer Chelkas, Tfilas Kalim says this. In other words, we have to understand the Ramah with the Ramah. Again, the Bichodesh argue the Ramah, and the pritoya defend the Ramah. But it's pretty clear that we have to chayshish for the pritoya. But here's the chiddush. Since the Prichodesh says you pata from tefillah, so in practical halacha we'll toivel it b'loi bracha. So now coming back to the original chakira, what is the chi of tefillah? Is it a keili of oichel, or is it using it in the food? That's b'diyuk the machlokes Prichodesh and pritoya. So let's apply this to Maisa. When something is chayiv and tefillah, even once is awesome. That's our halacha. A keili that's sometimes used for oichel, it's somewhat normal. We'll soon see examples. That's the machlokes if you go basar roiv. But a very strange hamtzah to use an iron for pizza, all agree is pat. Good. Now let's talk tachlis. The shalu began with the hammer that you want to use to crack a nut. You have to toivel it. So this is mutar l'chol, because the hammer is not made to open nuts, crack nuts. Now, one question I don't know the answer to: what about using a hammer to crack a coconut? See, I asked around. I'm not familiar with coconut so much, and I asked people, "How do you open a coconut?" There's no coconut cracker. He says, "What do you mean? You have to use a hammer?" So maybe for a hammer, for a coconut, maybe is normal. I'll leave it as a tzarchiyim. But one thing I do know: a hammer to crack a nut, even the pritoya, even the Ramah holds, is mutter. A beautiful mashal. Unfortunately, today we don't have it that often. It's a different social life, but it's a good mashal of our sugya. Is a pocket knife. Now there used to be a status symbol. Some has a pocket knife, but basically it has different features. It has a knife to cut something. It has nail scissors. It has a filer, whatever. Do you have to toivel it? Because it's made to be handy when you need it. you might need it to cut a box, a string. You might need it to cut food. How do you look at a pocket knife? And if it's a chiv deraisa, it's a metal blade. So I looked in the poskim. It's interesting. You find a certain tendency to paskin based on the normal social habits of your country. The Sefer Tfilas Kalim, it's Amid Kuf Tzadik Dalet, Rabbi, is the first Sefer, the first Kitta Sefer that ever came out. Tav Shem Lamed Dalet, I think it came out. He says a pocket knife is chayav and tefillah with a bracha. Why? Because it's made to cut food. So maybe the filer is not chayav, but the knife, you cut food. So one of the later poskim who got American, the Avnei Yoshvei Chelik Aleph Simin Kuf Mem Vav, he writes to the Tfilas Kalim, how could you say that? Don't you know we go bust the Rav Tashmishai and you use it for other things? So he responded very, politely. Look in the bottom. I said ayin, beginning of the sefer, and there I said if it's Rav Tashmishai for food, you have to toivel it. Here, it's Rav Tashmishai. A pocket knife is made to cut food. So, obviously, if you tell me in America, the derech is that it's used to cut non-food, so it's pata. It's not Gzeres HaKosev. Eretz Yisrael, Tafshin Lamed Daled, that was the derech. So it's totally in the Makkah, and what the use is. Like Rabbi Feld in a Sefer, he speaks about this exact case of his pocket knife. He says, Tayv B'loi Bracha, because it's not Rav Tashmishi for food. Just talking about like it's Pri-Toyer and Pri-Chodesh. Question, I know this was asked to the Beis Hara, a woman, but was making a cake with icing, and they wanted to put whip the icing on the cake. And they just bought a metal ruler. True story. And they want to use the metal ruler to smear the icing onto the cake. Do you have to toivel that metal ruler? See, if it's wood, it's no shayla. Metal is a mitzvah deraisa. So the answer is, this is our sugya. It's no one buys a ruler to put on icing. Now, similar to that, I saw a question, it's a little more common. People like to make a design or lines in icing, so they use a pin, a push pin, a sewing needle. They have to toivel it. It sounds modern. There it says, no, it's not kli suda. A pin is not a kli suda. You have a good idea, so zayin azoi, but it's not a kli suda, and the kul alma does not need tefillah. Another true story, someone wanted to make a matziv. That's the excuse of everything that people do that makes no sense. So he bought a glass vase, big one, and he filled it from top to bottom with jelly beans. And it's a good idea to show how brave he is, eat as much as you want. Problem is, he didn't toivel it. Okay, this is a glass, mechiv d'rabbanan, but it's still a chiv d'rabbanan. So the answer, hopefully, is it's still not normal to do that. So it's not a kli suda, even though it's touching the food is touching the keili. This would be pata from tefillah. If you miyachid it, every party you make, you use it for a serving bowl, then you have to toivel it. Why not? But le'eis ata, it's not a kli suda. Chicken scissors, poultry scissors, is an interesting question. I'll tell you why. They call it poultry for a reason, because it seems that the real design, the reason why they sell this product is to cut raw chicken. Raw chicken is much tougher than cooked chicken. So what's the shayla? It's still chicken. The Mechaber says in Sif Hey, a sakin of shchita, some say it doesn't have to have tefillah. It's machshir oichel, but since after the shchita you can't eat the chicken as it is, so it's not machshir, a food that's royal achila. The Ramah says yesh cholkim, and you should toivel b'loi bracha. So the Pais can learn from this Mechaber Ramah that a food that a keili touches the food, if you can't eat the food as it is, it's at most toivel b'loi bracha. It's a yesh cholkim. What would be a good example today? Poultry shears, chicken scissors, as we call it. If it's only used to cut raw chicken, it would be at most a mechumra of the Ramah, toivel b'loi bracha. The only question is, if you want to use it once to cut cooked chicken, So would there be more of a chiyuv? So hopefully you toivel it before, because toivel bracha. But this would be a good example of Rav Tashmishay. If for some reason you didn't toivel it, now you have to toivel it, because according to the Pri Chodesh, you according to the Pri Toyer, you don't look at Rav Tashmishay, and you have to go right now, take it and toivel it. I saw an interesting shiloh. They have these dip holders. I don't know the right word for it. A metal container that you put the dips in it, so it doesn't touch the actual food. It touches the container. A charger plate also doesn't touch the actual food. Those things are going to be potter. The Pri Chodesh himself says, when you sometimes put the food onto the tripod, it's still potter, because you go basar Rav Tashmishay. You see, the l'shitasai, this would be potter, you go basar Rav Tashmishay. A potato peeler, interesting, I stress that, we'll soon talk about a regular vegetable peeler, but a specially designed potato peeler would not need tefillah b'bracha, because the potato that you peel is raw. So it's like the case of the sakin shechita. But l'maisa, more often than not, it's one and the same. There's one peeler for potatoes and vegetables and cucumbers. So that would be a question of Rav Tashmishay. But more mistavra is, if it's made for all, so it's not Rav Tashmishay, it's made for both. So you have to toivel it like a regular tefillah, because it's made for both. And according to most poskim, if you peel an apple or any edible fruit or vegetable that's edible as it is after tefillah, you would have to make a bracha on tefillah of a peeler, because it's machsha the oichel. The only chiddush is a potato peeler maybe is different. If you take a peeler and you want to shred chocolate like some people do, so that's also it's chayiv and tefillah. Question that we began with: you have a metal washing cup, a metal tepela, and you want to use it. So the truth is, most people don't use it to cook eggs. A Balbus told me recently, he decided that he couldn't find a pot for an egg. He was a little lazy. So he took the washing cup, a nice design cup, put water in it, an egg, and cooked it over the stovetop. And it ruined the cup. It had a very beautiful design, a very expensive design. The whole thing was ruined. In other words, metal cups are not made to cook eggs. That's a road trip mentality. It's not made to cook eggs. But you know what's more common? This must be an old minhag, because everybody does it. You warm the baby bottle, you put it into a tepela, there's hot water in it, and warms the bottle. Is that chayiv in tefillah? Or some people do it. They take the tepela, the metal cup, and they put water in it, and they put water from the urn into the chalent, or they put water from the sink into the urn. They use the metal cup. Now, personally, if I think in a shul that should not be done, the sink is dirty, you don't know what's going on in the sink, there's germs. Ramos says in Kuf Tezai and Sif Hey, you shouldn't put money in your mouth. I mean, you shouldn't do that. Stam, you're choking it because of germs. So a cup in a public place, who knows what's going on? The people will spit out. But some people do it. They take the metal cup, they put water in, cold water, and they put it into the urn. Oh, that's a kli suda l'chayra. But then again, Rav Tashmishay, you don't buy a washing cup to fill the urn. So one thing I'll say, the good news is, using a metal cup to warm a baby bottle is not chayiv in tefillah. It's machsha the oichel, doesn't touch the food. And that's beferish. Even if you have a specially designed bottle warmer, it's not chayiv in tefillah. No, nutcracker, the shell is part of the nut until after you crack it. That's why it's not muktzah. We're looking at the nut as one. But this is not touching the food. Now, the Maisa, the Sefer Tfilas Keili, in Tfilas Kelim, Amid Reishud Aleph, he says that you should toivel the washing cup because it's used to fill up an urn. I guess in his time, in his country, that was done. So the Maisa, it's pashit that the egg is not a problem. Cooking an egg is not a problem, even like the Ramah and the Pritoya. Using it to fill up the urn, if you do it, that should be a reason to be mechayiv. Next question is a beautiful question also, and that comes up in different forms. A toaster oven that today they sell does not need tefillah. What do you have to toivel? The rack. Why? Because the rack touched the food. Lemaisa is just holding up the food. But what's the difference? It's like the tripod in Shulchan Aruch. Now the question is, it's like the other case in Shulchan Aruch of the grill. The grill cover needs tefillah. So we have a toaster oven rack like the grill, which is a ferisha mechaba in Siv Dalet. Now let's talk tachlis. Some people only use the oven rack for pots and pans, but never put food directly onto the oven rack. So for them, there's no shaila. But many people, they would put in raw potatoes, baked potatoes in it, put challah, defrost it, toast it. Especially if you have two ovens, a milchika oven, what's so hard to believe people put food onto the rack? So the shaila is, does that lead us to the conclusion you have to toivel the oven rack? Don't forget it's metal. So you're talking about a suffix deraisa. So if you never put food directly on it, there's no shaila. But many people do put food on it. So Lemaisa, the Sefer Tfilas Kelim, on Reish Lamaches, Hitaka says, if you put food on it, it's no different than a grill. Same thing, and that's the Machab and Siv Dalet. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky was asked this question, and he had a very big chiddush. We'll soon see where it's coming from. But since it's part of the oven, and the oven is not a keili, oven is osir l'nachas, it's stationary, it's heavy, even not heavy, attached to the house, even if not, it's a heavy item that moved. So an oven is not a keili, and therefore chayiv and tefillas keili. So the oven rack is part of the oven, even though it's totally independent, it could be taken in and out. But this is what he says, it's like the oven and not chayiv and tefillah. Lemaisa, another tzat we make would be Rav Tashmisha. Because they don't design the oven rack to put challah on it, or potatoes. You're doing it, okay, it's not modern, but it's still Rav Tashmisha. So like the Bichadash, it's more for that reason. Like the Chaim Kanievsky is a new reason, it's part of the oven. And if someone does toivel it, no, Tevila bracha. But I'll tell you something which is a little concerning to me. Rabbi Yasha says that a toaster oven is not enough just to toivel the rack, because you can't cook it on a rack. You need a pot cover, something to keep the heat. What is the pot and what is the pot cover of a toaster oven? The toaster oven itself. So it's not like an oven where the heat is so intense it could cook as it is. You have to contain the heat. So he felt that not only the rack has to be toiveled of the toaster oven, but even the toaster oven itself. Now it's not done obviously, but at least the rack should be. We should understand that the rack of a toaster oven and even of a regular oven is not so outlandish to say if you use it on a pretty constant basis to cook food directly on the rack, that rack should be cupped. That rack should be toiveled. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Lamaisa says in Sefer Tfilas Kelim, the minig is we don't toivel these tanurim, even the small ones, because it's not looked at as a keili, it's still lamaisa an oven. Another question, which again you see how it's totally in people's relationship to it. In America, the shaila is people like to roast marshmallows. They put it on the stovetop grate. Now moving up, till now was the oven. Now was the stovetop, that black grate, which was almost always used just for pots. But he put on his marshmallow. In Eretz Yisrael, this is more common. They roast chatzilim, eggplant, right on the grate. You have to toivel the grate. A grate is something that never touches food except for these cases. So these are the different ways of doing it, but this would not be the case of the grill. This would be a case of Rav Tashmisha is not to put food on it. It's not made for it. And marshmallows is taka unusual. So that we saw the pitaya is moida. If you'll tell me that the style has become, people use the grate to roast chatzilim, then you have a trouble. then according to the Pre-Toyer and the Ramah, you would have to toivel it. You don't go bus arrive, and if it's normal enough, itaka would need tefillah. Next question, which again is also challenging, and that is, some people have this minig, they practice is the right word, that occasionally they do put food directly onto the blech. Now Shabbos, you have the issue with Shabbos, but let's say he puts challah to warm on the side of the blech, or a piece of kugel onto the blech on the side. We're talking about there's no issue of Shabbos. But Lamaisa, he puts food onto the blech directly. Do you have to toivel a blech? Again, it doesn't sound right, but that's not the answer. Why should there not be a chiyuv of toiveling a blech if you put food directly on it? So if you're like this, like most people, we don't put food on the blech straight, no shayla. But if you put a potato, a sweet potato, a challah to get a little warm, does that mean it needs tefillah? So again, this is probably the same approach. We don't have a blech to put food on it. The blech is to keep pots on it. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, if you're using it to put food directly on it, so he said, toivelei bracha. That can't be better than the original pre-chodesh versus pre-toya that we toivel b'loi bracha. Now, lemaisa, Yom Tiv, some people use a blech not for halacha, pasha practicality, and there you could have it more commonly, people put food onto the blech. So you have to know your use of the blech, but it's not so outlandish to have to toivel a blech if it's used just with the food directly on it. Next question. A fruit bowl, which you put on the table, people take fruit from it, is vade chayiv and tefillah. You're not cooking in it, but you're taking food from it. That's like a regular kli. So again, you're not taking it to your seat, but it's in the center. It doesn't make a difference. You take our food, you eat it, chayiv and tefillah. Now, it's a different share really about a storage container, but this is a kli. It's brought to the table. Frek the Ber Moshe in Chelik Dalet Simon Tzadik Tes, that in his time, this was the Metzias, the fruit bins in the refrigerator, they had a special drawer for the fruit, either was made of glass or metal. Either one is chayiv and tefillah. Zok the Ber Moshe, why are we not toiveling those refrigerator bins that keep the fruit in it? See, if you have a shelf of a refrigerator that touches the food but doesn't touch the actual food, everything's in pots, in containers, in jars, so shelves are not chayiv and tefillah. But the fruit bin, many people put the fruit the way it is. In fact, someone told me, you keep fruit in bags, fruits and vegetables in bags, it doesn't last as long. It causes the fruit to lose its freshness. Take it out of the bag, it can last a while. So the Ber Moshe held, we shouldn't chayiv and tefillah. It's glass or metal. You eat straight from, you take out and you take a fruit and eat it. It might be a new type of fruit bowl, even though it's on the table. You're being mekel, it's not much to be saimach on. That's what he says emphatically. Now, the Mincha Shloima in Chelik Beis Siman Samach Vav Sivka and Ches says a very dik chiddush, similar to Reb Chaim's chiddush. A refrigerator is not a keili. It's too big, it's too heavy. The fruit bin is part of the refrigerator. So just like the refrigerator itself is not chayiv and tefillah, the bin has the same halacha. Now, what did the Rebbetziner Rav hold? He probably held it's a separate keili. You pull it out and in. But I guess the Bershom make a halfin, and today they make all plastic. But I should mention another point. The Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Tes Pei Gimel also discusses the fruit bin, and he says an interesting chiddush. The fruit bin and the refrigerator are not really preparing the apple. It's not like cutting it, peeling it, cracking it. The apple, same apple. It keeps it cooler, it shouldn't spoil, but it's not doing a tikkun in the oichel, as opposed to a peeler peels it, a nutcracker cracks the nut. This doesn't make a tikkun in the oichel. So even if it's chayiv and tefillah, it's not enough of a tikkun that requires a tefillah. The Chotshani, Mr. Karelis in Amid Samach, says a similar yisoid. He says He says it's like something like the baskets that they keep vegetables in, but it's not brought to the table. Or it says they have in caterers, yeshivas have these wagons. They keep food in it. It's not machshav the oichel. It transports it. It's not machshav the oichel. But Kitza, I think that at least we could understand why the Welt doesn't toivel the fruit bins. So if it's plastic, there's nothing to talk about. But even metal or glass, there is what we makel, what we seimach on. It's part of the refrigerator, or it's not enough of a kli oichel, not a suit that doesn't in any way prepare the food. Now, Lamaisa, again, it's not as posh as we'd like it to be, but hopefully today it's all plastic, so there wouldn't be a problem. Next question. Sounds funny, but it needs attention. Today they started making, it's a very popular item, they have these tables, either glass tables, tempered glass of course should break, and or metal tables. Now, the derech is, it's supposed to have a very homey, cozy feeling. You, on a kitchen table, you could put food directly onto the table. Not you could, they do. You put bread, you put fruit, you could put danishes. Of course, you can't put a hot soup on the table, but you do put food directly onto the table. The question is, do you have to toivel the table? Now, how do you toivel the table? So you'll find a big mikveh. First of all, today they have these Olympic-sized mikvehs anyhow. But besides that, someone told me, one of these commercial manufacturers that make all these urns for the shuls, they have a huge mikveh that they lower kalim into it with a crane. I mean, of course, it's a system they have, but the heter is not big because I can't toivel because it's too big. Find an eitzah. But the question is, do you have to toivel a table? Now, let me just tell you, no one ever toivel tables till now, for a good reason. Most tables were wood. Number two, most people didn't eat off a table. You had a tablecloth, plastic, disposable, but something. But they want to make it a certain coziness on a glass table in a kitchen. It's like a plate. So if you tell me you eat off right off the table, the food on the table, you can't say it was never done because it was never done. Because this is different. So how do you find a precedent for a table like this? Again, a wood table is potter, a glass table is potter, but this is a metal or glass. So the Ben Ish Chai in Shana Beis, Parshas Matais, Ois Yedalid, speaks about a table. But listen to where he's coming from. A shulchan shel eitz that's connected with metal screws. So the metal screws is the ma'imid. So Chayr should need a tefillah. He says, but Lamaisa doesn't need a tefillah. Why? Because people don't put food onto the table itself. They have a mappa, so it doesn't touch the food. So look what he's assuming. A wooden table that has metal screws is enough to mechayev and tefillah. The only heter is because it doesn't touch the food. So to say for tefillah's kelim, it's Amud Reish Lamed Zayin. Based on this, Ben Ish Chai, if you have a metal or glass table and you don't use a tablecloth at all times and the food touches the table, it should reasonably be mechayev in tefillah's kelim. Now again, I know it's a chiddush, but you have to find the reason why you're not doing that. So the question is, if it's a big table, we're going to get that soon. We're talking about a table that moves, that's movable. But I saw Rabbi Yashiv in Vayishma Moshe. He says, this is a keili, a table's a keili. Reb Chaim Kanievsky is quoted also as saying this mitzius. So if you say it's too big, so find an eitzah, or don't buy it, or buy a plastic one. But it's much more gishmak. It happened to be a ferish toisvis. And again, it's not my bekiyas. All the poskim tell this too. Toisin Shabbos daf tes vavam bebeis divamaschol aloma. In a different context, Tois is saying that the Mishnah says in mikvahs about a shulchan and about a tavla. Shulchan's a table, tavla is a tray. Is there a problem of chatzitza? Zok the Maram, I'm on Vakar Gemara, and the Shabbos Shalmi on this Tois both say, what's Tois talking about? Chatzitza by what? It can't be chatzitza by tefillas kelim, because a table is not a kli suda. So both the Maram, Shabbos Shalmi, learning up a toisvis that a table is not a kli suda. What is it? a table. Now, it's hard to know if they put food on or not, but both of them say that a table is not chayiv and tefillah. But Lamaisa, the Bach, I looked it up myself, in the beginning of Simon Reish Beis and the Toiser Rush, both say a table that's used for food on it is chayiv and tefillah. So now, where do we go from here? So there's a beautiful discussion in the Chut Shani, it's Amid Chafhei, Mr. Karelitz, and he sent me to this Taisis, but at the end he says something that's godless. And he says, in the times of the Gemara and Toisvis, they didn't eat on one big table. You remember by the Seder night, you have a little Seder Bethel, and you have a little table, and his Lashon is, this is like a tray. They're talking about a dargish, a tray. Oh, a small tray that's metal, and the food touches it, mechates, why not toivel it? But a big table, if it's not moved around, so the Chut Hashani says, it's yitach, and that would be a reason to pata. The fact is, it's not a keili. So, la'eis ata, it seems it's enough stars to be makel, especially if you use it with a tablecloth, occasionally food touches it, that would be Rav Tashmish. I'll leave you two interesting shilas. One question was the glass turntable of a microwave. So, if it's typically, a lot of times it's glass. It's plastic, I'm sorry. Plastic is not chayiv and tefillah. But you could buy a glass turntable. So the turntable, kishmoi keinu, is basically turns around and helps in the process of preparing it. And if you never put food directly onto the turntable, there's no shaila. But the question is, people put raw potatoes, raw sweet potatoes, other foods onto the turntable. So this is, again, mamish our sugya. If a person knows he never puts food directly on it, there's no chiv and tefillah. Doesn't touch the food. If once in a blue moon he does it, so light the pitaya, he should not do without tefillah. He's using it, a kli oichel. It's not something vite or wild. But if lamaisa, the old poskim say this, if he typically puts food directly onto the turntable, he should toivel with a bracha. It's not a question of Rav Tashmish. This is what it's made for. In his house, there's no difference with touching food, doesn't touch food, because it's made for both. So this is why I saw the Chut Shani also says, he concludes that if you put the food on it, toyin tefillah. Now I can't know for sure if you eat tefillah with a bracha, without a bracha, but I did see for Shaima Taka Paskins, if you put food on it, typically directly on it, toivel with a bracha. Last but not least, a question to think about. I don't have the right answer yet, but think about this question. Someone bought a steak knife for steak, a real kli suda, okay? He didn't have a chance to toivel yet, so he puts it away. Rather, I should mention, the Am Shlomo says you should not keep in your house a keili shloi tovel. You might use it. That's how Vait Chazal were concerned about a tefillah. But he bought a steak knife Thursday, he didn't get around to it. Maybe he's going to take it to the mikveh later, Friday, but Maisa right now, he didn't toivel it. His mazel, Friday morning, he gets a delivery from the store, the boxes all taped up, and he can't find the razor. When you need it, he can't find it. He wants to use his steak knife to open the boxes. Now listen closely. Can he use it without tefillah? He didn't toivel it yet. So you're probably wondering, like I did, what's the shaila? Cutting boxes is not a chila, right? We spoke about this before Chanukah, different shaila, similar. He bought schnapps glass to drink, but he didn't toivel it yet. And punkt, he needed some of these to light menorah, Chanukah licht. Can he use it without tefillah? And what's the tzad of these two cases? A new scenario. If you have a kli oichel that's chayiv and tefillah, a steak knife, a schnapps cup, they're both chayiv and tefillah. Now that it's chayiv and tefillah, can I use it for non-achila purposes? What's pshat? Till now we spoke just fakert. I'm taking a iron for achila. That you can understand. That's chayiv and tefillah, maybe because it's preparing food, but it's not a kli oichel. Here it's punkt fakert. You have a kli oichel. There's a chiyav deraisa of toiveling that metal knife because it's a kli oichel. Maybe once it's chayiv in tefillah, you can use without tefillah. Or maybe ikechasam in aseifa. About it's chayiv in tefillah. But if it's not in conjunction to food, why is it chayiv? Now, do you have a raya either way? I don't. Maybe since the Gemara stresses klei suda murim b'parsha, and this is klei suda, and once you bought it for that, maybe you have to toivel it before you use it. So a lot is written about it, but I just saw the Darkei Tshuva and Sif Katan Lametes quotes from a Ginzei Elimelech on who that is. He bought one of these pocket knives, but has two blades. The smaller one is to cut nails. The big one's to cut fruit. So Dr. Ginzei Elimelech, to use the big blade to cut nails, your nails, is also without tefillah. Since it's a kli suda, and you didn't toivel it, it's also even for non-achila purposes. And he concludes with tzarachian. So before next Chanukah, look into this. I couldn't talk to you all.
Friday, a new invention, scissors.
Shem Yegenshir like to be a shakar. There was a Smith Shlita for today's shir. Have the exclusive sponsoring a shir. Call Yegenshir at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshiva.com. Chananya ben Akasha, email Otzak Yishboch Lazakis, is Yisrael Afikach. Here, but I'm telling you, Mr. Shnemal, I know Chofis, I'm on Sidke, Yagdol Terviyade. Everybody say if you toivel before the beginning of the year, you don't have to toivel before the sikkim of the choir and tefillah.
Okay, just let's chazal we learned today. First of all, the source of kli suda is a kli of tefillah's kelim is kli suda. That's why besides the mitzvah deraisa, there's also an issur of keili shaloi tavel. The question of tefillah is totally in designation. If you take a steak knife and turn it into a kli klafim to cut leather, there's no chiyuv. But once it's a kli oichel, it's also to use even once. This misconception has to be stopped. There's a chiyuv toivel, even once is also. There's a fundamental machlokes Ramah and Pitoya versus Pichodash, a keil that has made for non-achila purposes. To use it just once or a roi, is there a special patur of roi tashmiisho? That's the sheet of the Pichodash. The Pitoya and Ramah don't hold that's correct. They hold that's not correct. But all agree, even the Pitoya, a use that is not normal, the mashal using the iron to warm pizza, is batladaita, and that's not chayiv in tefillah. In other words, there are two factors in hilchos tefillah. There's the Bavli's kli suda, that's chayiv, and there's the Yishalmi's tumas akum kedush Yisrael, that's only by achila. The question is, if you have achila without a kli suda, is there at least a chayiv or not? La'alacha we paskin that it has to be to make a bracha. You don't make a bracha on this case of miyat tashmishay, but we pass it like the Britoyer and the Ramah, that on a question of miyat usage, you toivel below bracha. We did see the stoker that's used to boil liver is abnormal use, is not chayiv in tefillah. A hammer to crack nuts does not need tefillah. We have a tzarachin about cracking coconuts, if that's the derech. A pocket knife depends on really what it's used for, but if its use is part of its use was for food, then avadi chayiv tefillah with a bracha. Using a ruler on icing or a pushpin on icing is not chayiv in tefillah. A vase for jelly beans would be totally in the mitzias, but if it's not done, no chayiv tefillah. Again, a screwdriver is for mixing, is zichana chayiv. Chicken scissors that's used for raw chicken, tefillah b'loi bracha. cut chicken is tefillah bebracha. Touching the food is a very important criterion. If it doesn't touch the food, the mashal, as we said, the charging plate or a dip holder, there's no chiyuv tefillah. A potato peeler does not need tefillah with the bracha, but it peels other vegetables and fruits that's edible as is, tefillah bibracha. A metal washing cup, l'chari, does not need tefillah. Oven racks, if you use it on a pretty steady basis, l'chari, you should toivel the oven rack unless you go with the sheet as part of the oven. A stovetop grate is not used and therefore no chiyuv tefillah. A blech, again, if it's not used in a normal way, it doesn't need tefillah. A metal or glass fruit bin, fruit bowl needs tefillah. A fruit bin, the minik is not to toivel it. A metal or glass table that's used directly on it without a tablecloth, there's a makam to say that it's potter because it's a table, it's not a keili. The glass microwave turntable that's used regularly with food on it should be toiveled with a bracha if it's used regularly. Kli suda for non-foods, opening with a knife, opening a box, that's how it's archian, b'yach kamoid. Yeah.